Hot news opinion: the shutdown shows the weakness of the resistance. The New York Times. The grassroots progressive activism of the past 2 years has been inspiring. But it's still a opinion columnist. The grassroots progressive movement known as the resistance has had a very good 2 years. It attempts to take, but the government shutdown has shown the limits of this new progressive movement. The resistance has, when I've spoken to people from other countries over the past couple of weeks, they have been shocked that Americans have not begun protesting the shutdown in large numbers. About 800, if this were happening in Europe, as Luigi Zingales of the University of Chicago told me, people would be pouring into the streets. And yet in the instead of lining up to protest, hundreds of federal workers in Washington lined up last week to eat at makeshift soup kitchens. Of them doing it's not hard to envision a different scenario. Trump was already. Imagine if there were a progressive movement strong enough to pressure Trump by highlighting the damage he is doing. What could that look like? With even a minority of them participating, it would create huge logistical problems at airports and elsewhere. Americans who yes, strikes by federal workers are. But requiring people. The modern labor movement was launched in part by the illegal of 1936-37, when workers in Flint, Michigan, and other cities occupied factories to keep them from operating. The civil rights movement. The celebrations of Martin Luther King Jr. will include a lot of pap about peace and equality. But King didn't think. The government shutdown, of course, is a minor issue compared to those two advances. But it is also, the Trump resistance has been the most hopeful sign of activism in decades. Thousands and thousands, but relative to the scale of the country's problems, and the strength of past political movements, the new movement remains too small and too weak. Figuring out how. In the meantime, the shutdown reaches its 1-month mark by the end of Monday, the same day the country is supposed to be honoring grassroots activism. With commentary on the news and reading suggestions from around the web. Follow the New York Times opinion section on, and
Raindrop, drop top, smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park pot.